can say that the government is fully engaged to work on various modalities, on various models of dealing with this problem of stressed assets. Instead of the conventional way of infusing more capital, the government has already launched, as I mentioned, governance reforms. The government is also working on other modalities of dealing with this problem of stressed assets, and as and when the decisions are taken by the government, they will be made public. Another area where we need to create and seize the opportunity is to optimize the performance of the power sector. A lot has been said on the problem of the DISCOMs. That problem is being addressed. So as a government, we need to, and the government is today committed to continue with the reforms, continue with the initiatives, major policy reforms like the GST, the Goods and Services Tax, the continuation of the initiatives with regard to ease of doing business, and carrying out sectoral reforms, whether it is the textile sector or it is the shipping sector or it is in the defense production sector, where I am happy to mention that a lot of initiatives have already been taken to generate and to give a boost to private sector manufacturing. Now, while doing all this, while easing the process of reforms, one area where, so far as the G20 as a forum is concerned, we need to also look at is that while we are working on coordinated approach, whether it is monetary policy or, as the Minister for Railways pointed out, the need for working in a coordinated approach to have the integration of global services sectors or integration of the global labor market, we should not, as a world community, move to a regime of over-regulation. I think a right balance has to be found between easing, unshackling businesses and economic activities on the one hand, which is very, very important to see that the private sector investments are really able to perform in an optimal manner. At the same time, in our enthusiasm to deal with problems of, let's say, shadow banking or shadow financial system, we should not go to a regime of over-regulation. And while reforms have to continue, reforms have to ease the processes, reforms also will have to bring in and place regulatory mechanisms in a manner that there is appropriate coordination between the various countries. So there is a need to find a balance between easing the regulations and at the same time having the right quantum of regulation without moving to a regime of over-regulation. Now, we need to the global community needs to work together. So far as India is concerned, the Reserve Bank of India and the Finance Ministry is working in very close cooperation. Within Finance Ministry also, all departments, we are having regular discussions and regular meetings to see that coordinated action is taken by the government. So I would like to conclude by saying that while volatility and uncertainty have become the new normal, but there are opportunities available to the global community. While in India we are faced with large number of challenges, India also is uniquely placed for being perhaps one of the very few bright spots in the global community, and India also has large number of opportunities, and the government is taking necessary policy measures. So this is, as has been said by somebody, this is, the global community needs to come back to normalcy. There is nothing called normalcy, but try and move at least in that direction. And we in India, the government considers, as has been pointed out by somebody, that this is India's chance to grow. And the government is fully committed to take all necessary measures to see that this opportunity which is available to India to grow is not stifled or restricted in any manner. Thank you once again for inviting me, and I'm sure in the next 2 days you will have very fruitful and worthwhile discussions. We look forward to some of the deliberations and the conclusions and some of the experiences and thought-provoking ideas that would emanate from this 2 days event. I congratulate ICRIER for taking this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Das, for those stimulating remarks. We will indeed produce a policy brief and send it to the government. Without taking any more time, we'll have opportunities for a floor interaction with Mr. Das and Dr. Yoshino once Dr. Yoshino has spoken. As the Minister said, and as Mr. Das has reiterated, India's looking to play a bigger role in the international community and trying to get the international community to look at infrastructure in a much more constructive manner and try and replicate the success that the G20 had earlier with respect to international policy coordination. The relative success of the G20 in that area, and try to extend that agenda and try and kind of replicate that success in infrastructure, something that India so sorely needs as we embark upon our growth. Dr. Yoshino will give us the global perspective of the G20. I know personally that he is kind of his academic and scholarly interests are in the area of small and medium enterprises and financing of small and medium enterprises. And those of you who've looked at that literature would see that he has done indeed a lot of scholarly work and published a number of articles in that area. And as the Minister said in the morning, that innovation really is an attribute of small and medium enterprises, and whenever these companies start, they start small and then become big. Although when they become big, they try and stifle other innovation. But one has to try and create a balance and ensure that small and medium enterprises have the right climate to grow within a country. I'm sure he'll speak on that, but a lot of other global issues relating to G20. His CV is in the folder. He's extremely accomplished, so I'm not going to read out the CV. But at the moment, he is the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute, which is a think tank, not only to ADB, but think tank to scholars and academicians across the world. So thank you, Dr. Yoshino. Thank you to you and to ADBI for supporting this conference yet again. They've been doing it for a number of years and supporting it yet again. Can we please give him a round of applause?
Thank you very much for inviting me to a very important event. Today, I'd like to talk about Asia and global issues. And lastly, I'd like to touch upon infrastructure and infrastructure finance. I think there are 4 important points in challenges. Number 1 is infrastructure is very important in developing Asia. But at the same time, Minister also touched upon financial stability is very important. And in order to avoid current account deficits and fiscal deficits or twin deficits, I think one is monetary policy and exchange rate mechanism is very important. Secondly, in order to avoid huge fiscal deficits, creating the domestic savings are very important. I heard this morning many people hold gold in India. In Japan, we don't have any gold shop. Everybody puts their money either in post office or banks. And those money are fully utilized to investment. So I think the circulation of money from private sector to industries and governments are very important. And also increasing the savings rate in the country is another important thing. In increasing savings, there are 3 aspects. One is short-term deposits. Secondly, insurance, which is long-term savings. And last one is pensions, private pension and government pension. And self-sustainability of private support will reduce the fiscal deficits of the government in future. And that will avoid the future crisis and contagion. And secondly, supporting equitable growth is another important thing. And I think education, equal opportunities for education will be very important. I learned in Germany and Sweden, the cost of university is 0. Everybody can access to university. And that will create a very equal society. And education not only for children, but also SME educations are very important. In Japan, there are many SMEs, but SME employ only 2 or 3 employees, or 1. So they don't have very good education system in SMEs. So Japanese local government created education for SME employees. Many SMEs have been gathered together. Then the young workers come in Japan in April. Then they take the prefectural government courses, 1 week or 2 weeks. And that will promote how to keep books and how to grease people and so on. Lots of basic activities, education had been provided to SMEs. So I think education for children and also manufacturing industries are very important. And sustainable, equitable growth, tax system is another important thing. In Japan, the rich people can transfer their money to their children, but it is not easy to transfer to their grandchildren because inheritance tax rates are very high. So that has created a very equal society of Japan. So one cannot rely on grandfather's wealth, only up to parents. And I think tax system will be very important. In the old days, we have a secret transport information system in the village. If someone looks very rich and they are not paying tax, many individuals in the city has called to tax authority. Can you check that person? And that was a community-oriented equal tax system in Japan. And that also created a very equal society. And I think supporting equitable growth will be very important. Number 3, promoting competitiveness and innovation. Too much regulation of the government will distract competitiveness. But on the other hand, too much competition will not be supportable. So I think in between, some balance between competitiveness and some regulations are very important. And innovation, Minister has talked about, often comes from SMEs. Many people know Honda company. It's a growing company. And somebody may know 7-Eleven in the retail business. Both of them came from SME, small and medium-sized enterprises. Honda president had a very interesting story about their finance. Honda used to produce motorcycle, 2-wheel. And Japanese government didn't allow Honda to produce automobile. The reason is we had Toyota and Nissan. And government thought 2 companies are enough for Japan. We don't need 3rd company to produce automobile. And the president of Honda was very angry. We can produce 2-wheel cars. Why can't we produce 4-wheel cars? So he started to borrow money from the bank. The bank said, your company is too small, so we cannot lend money to Honda. So Honda went to Mitsubishi Bank to borrow money. And local bank denied Honda to borrow money. So the Honda president of Honda went to Mitsubishi Bank. Then the branch manager of the Mitsubishi Bank looked at the eyes of president of Honda. His eyes were shining. So he thought this is a good company. And he started to lend money. And that is why Honda exists today. Another example is 7-Eleven. President, his name is Mr. Ito. I interviewed him and asked many times, how do you think about banks? Banks will never help us when it started to business. When his business became very large, banks approached him. Why don't you use my money? So he went to the local, very small credit associations to borrow money. And then 7-Eleven became an international organization. So how to finance SME is quite important. Large businesses has very good accounting system, but SMEs are very difficult to judge their quality. So in Japan, we have started to collect SME database in these 10 years. Then it is interesting, even in SME database, we can have some kind of statistical analysis whether this SME is reliable or not. And I'm now promoting to collecting database in many Asian countries. And we started in Thailand, Iran, and several other countries. And I hope I can create the database for SME, and that can make good SMEs easy to borrow money from banks and other financial institutions. Because the SME is a promotion of innovation in many countries. And lastly, protecting the environment is very important. And solar powers and wind powers and other energy has to be developed. And all those energy are not supported originally from banks. They went to community-type borrowings, and I would like to touch upon how to provide money in order to protect environment. And developing infrastructure is very important. But however, not all the infrastructures are effective. Some of the infrastructures could not create good economic powers, but other infrastructure had a very important impacts. I'll touch upon why. It is related to the indirect effect of infrastructure. The completion of infrastructure itself is not important. Whether the infrastructure construction will bring private sector activities in the region or not is very important. And if private sector use those infrastructure, then they can create jobs into the region. So only the completion of infrastructure does not necessarily bring any wealth to the region. So indirect effect and private economic activities associated with infrastructure investments are very important. And financial intermediation, stability of financial intermediation is also very important. Minister talked about too big to fail. Japan had experienced big financial crisis in 1997, 1998. And big banks has been supported by public sector money. However, all the management had been fired. And also, how much money had been injected was all reported transparently to the public. And all the management had been cleaned up, and then new management came into the big bank. And they have started to re-innovate their banks. And then, right now, about 20 years after the financial crisis of Japan, all the money which had been injected by the government had been returned. So I think capital injection is very important. However, at the same time, transparency and the responsibility of the management has to be very cleaned up. And harnessing human capital, as I mentioned, education, equal opportunity for education, and training for manufacturing industries and SMEs are very important. And thirdly, building seamless connectivity, investment, and also circulation of capital among various countries. And strengthening governance is very important. And transparency of the government is another important thing. Otherwise, that inefficiency created by government sector. And all of these in economics, we use aggregate supply and aggregate demand, will create a shift of aggregate supply and aggregate demand to the rightward. So stable inflation and big economic growth will be achieved by looking at all those factors. And also regional economic integration is important. Enhancing trade and services and labor mobility will create a big opportunities for everybody. However, the adjustment has to be taken into account. Too much deregulation in a short period will create a big problem, especially for agriculture and other sectors. Takes a long time to adjust from one equilibrium to another. Financial sector is very quick to adjust from one point to another. So I think each economy has different industrial structures. Then the adjustment speed has to be taken into account in order to achieve full integration of the regional countries. Next, I'd like to talk about infrastructure finance. There are 4 ways to finance infrastructure. Huge infrastructure needs in India and other Asian countries. First one is use taxpayers' money. However, too much reliance on taxpayers' money will create huge budget deficits. And second financing method is utilize postal savings. And this is done by Germany, France, and Japan. And these postal savings are different account from general account, tax account. And postal savings has been used for infrastructure investment, housing, or some